The last time that we had API up here in force, before Mike's visit, of course, we had Stephanie Wisman last year, who was up here. I'm sure many of you got a chance to meet her. But I think the full delegation was here in 1959 for the 100th anniversary of oil. And you will find that image over outside here, the Energy for America poster, which is every year. It's on your bags, your conference bags. It's printed out here. The Friends of Drake Well will be selling that at a little bit later here to their benefit. We provide it to them, and it allows them to generate a little bit of extra revenue. Please visit the gift shop outside. You will not regret it, especially if you're an energy geek like myself, and I'm sure many of you are. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mike Sommers, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Since his appointment in July 2018 as the 15th president, right, of API, he's overseen the strategic realignment of API's priorities and advocacy efforts. Among other initiatives, he led the organization through an unprecedented period in global energy markets, effectively positioning the industry through political transitions in Washington and in state capitals across the country, increased utilization and visibility of API standards and safety programs, and led the adoption of the industry's solutions-oriented effort to address the risks of climate change. Of course, he also spent a long time on Capitol Hill. You can read about his bio online, as well as a stint in the White House. And having done that myself, he seems to come out of it better, not worse. And it's very, very hard work. We're very, very happy that he's here with us today. And I'm very, very excited about his speech today, which is entitled From the First Well to the Next Chapter, Building America's Energy Future. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Mike Sommers. You're welcome. Come on up.
Thank you, Andrew. What an honor to be here. As a student of history, I can't believe it took me 8 years as the CEO of API to get to this historic site. Andrew asked me to be here last year, and I wasn't able to get here, but I wanted to make sure that I got here this year, and I can assure you that this is not my last trip to Titusville. I don't know what happened between 1959 and 2025, but I can assure you that this relationship with API and Titusville and the historic Drake Well is not going to end today, and we're excited about the opportunity. So excited to continue the ability to partner with this historic site. So a couple of things at the top here. For those of you who haven't walked through the museum, I would really encourage you to do it during one of the breaks today. It is not what I expected. This is a fully modern museum. I'm sure it is great for school kids to walk through this museum and have the opportunity to really learn the history of the American oil and gas industry. As the president and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, we've been part of that history for decades and decades. Started really in 1919 as an organization that needed to build standards for an oil industry that didn't have them at the time. This is our primary focus as an organization is as a standards association that started as a couple of standards for the pipeline community and has grown into 800 standards that the American Petroleum Institute maintains worldwide. We have offices in Beijing and Dubai and Rio that sell those standards and certifications into the international marketplace. So we're fully an international organization. As the industry has grown, the American Petroleum Institute has grown. But before I get to the true theme of my speech, I wanted to give you a little bit more history. One of the local natives here, of course, is Ida Tarbell. You can learn all about Ida in the museum behind me. Of course, Ida was the one who wrote the seminal book on the Standard Oil Company and led to its ultimate breakup. In 1904, it was Ida Tarbell's work that led to the breakup of the Standard Oil Company. What you may not know about Ida is that she wasn't just a famous muckraker, as Teddy Roosevelt called her, but she also was a historian. She wrote a lot of different biographies, including one of Abraham Lincoln in 1924. So in 1924, she wrote a book called In Lincoln's Footsteps, where she traced the path of Abraham Lincoln from his boyhood in Kentucky and Indiana, and then 25 years in the state of Illinois. I happened to grow up in the state of Illinois, and I remember as a kid, there were signs all over central Illinois for what was called the Lincoln Heritage Trail. And this was a trail that actually traced Ida Tarbell's steps when she wrote that biography. So the history between my youth and someone who grew up in a state, the land of Lincoln, where we didn't get President's Day off, we got Lincoln's birthday off. And our 8th grade trip wasn't to Washington, D.C., it was to Springfield, Illinois. When I was a kid in 5th grade, I memorized the Gettysburg Address. That was an assignment at my local parochial elementary school. So Lincoln was inculcated in my life, my entire youth. And that Lincoln Heritage Trail, I remember, going to Springfield and following the steps of Lincoln. So I recently picked up a book that someone recommended to me. It's called The Land of Lincoln by an author by the name of Andrew Ferguson, written in the early 2000s. And I'd encourage you to pick it up. Similar to me, he grew up in the state of Illinois and was inculcated with this Lincoln legacy. But I come to the 5th chapter where it starts talking about that Lincoln Heritage Trail, and this is what I learned. Andrew Ferguson went and met with the old state historian in the state of Illinois, and he asked him, where did the Lincoln Heritage Trail come from? And he said, well, I didn't come up with it. In the early 1960s, the marketing guys from the American Petroleum Institute showed up. And they said, we want to create this trail because if we promote more tourism, we're going to have more people buying gasoline. So it wasn't just the Drake well that API came in and helped preserve, but it was also Lincoln's legacy. So here we are today at the historic Drake well, the incredible history that we have here with API participating in the restoration of this project in 1934, and the early 1960s, API retracing Lincoln's steps to here we are today in a time of historic international change, where we're dealing with historic energy transitions. And today, we're celebrating what it's going to take for the United States to go from the true energy superpower that we are to taking it to the next level of energy leadership. We know the position that we are in today, where we have rising energy demand. In fact, in the United States, we expect energy demand to go up by 40% just in the next 15 years. And the real question that I think policymakers, and we have some of them here today, are going to have to answer is, where is that energy going to come from? Because we know that demand is going to go up. And by the way, we knew it was going to go up even before the dawn of artificial intelligence and more data centers. We knew that. Policymakers knew that. Why? Because more people are going into the middle class. They're using more air conditioning. And yeah, they're plugging more things into the grid. And that means we're going to need more energy sources going forward. But primarily, we're going to need a lot more natural gas. And that's where Pennsylvania comes in. This was the state that led the energy revolution from the beginning. This was the place that started the oil revolution in 1859. And then that revolution has continued. You've led the way for decades and decades to build energy sources of the future. This was the state that pioneered the fracking revolution. This was the state that was at the forefront of the coal revolution, the nuclear revolution. And I know that that history is going to continue today. As Senator McCormick said, we have the 4th largest natural gas reserves in the world right here under our feet. And natural gas is going to play such a key role going forward. I was honored earlier this year to be back in the Commonwealth, where I had the opportunity to speak to Senator McCormick's AI and Energy Summit that he held at Carnegie Mellon University, where he brought together hyperscalers and energy producers and people that are going to require that energy going forward. And the whole conversation was, where is that energy going to come from? So that's what this energy revolution is all about, and why Pennsylvania is going to play a key role going forward. The world consumes 100 million barrels of oil every single day. Think about that for a minute. The world consumes 100 million barrels of oil every single day. And we've talked a lot about energy transitions, but we actually had an experiment in this just a few short years ago during the pandemic. So think about the position that we were in then, where everyone was staying home from school. No one was going to work in the Western world. Guess what the number was then? The world still consumed 90 million barrels of oil every single day. This energy transition is not going to be easy. And we know that oil and natural gas are going to play a key role for decades and decades to come. And what's great about where we stand today is the last big energy revolution started right here, 100 feet from us, right behind you, that historic Drake well, when an entrepreneur decided to take a risk. When everyone else doubted Colonel Drake persisted. And discovering oil on this historic site, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania became the world's energy leader. And you're poised to do it again. But what is going to be required to keep that energy revolution going forward? It started here, but how do we keep it going? That is the question that policymakers have to take today. And I think the answer is pretty simple. We have the resources in this country. We have them right here under our feet. But what is holding us back? What's holding us back is a government, both at the state and federal level, that is preventing us from getting these resources, extracting these resources. We have the most broken permitting process at the federal and state level that you can possibly imagine. Right now, it takes over a decade for many of these energy projects to actually take hold. We don't have a decade to wait. We know that this AI revolution is going on. We know that the world is going to require more energy. And again, that all comes back to that key question: where is it going to come from? And if we can't extract these resources, we are going to cede our place as the #1 energy producer in the world. So, my call today is that Republicans and Democrats come together and have this conversation about where we're going to get this energy and how we reform a permitting structure that is so broken. We've seen it time and time again. Pipelines canceled as a consequence of them no longer being economic because we can't get them built in a timely manner. It happens over and over and over again. Let me give you a key example. Just last year, it took an act of Congress to build a pipeline in this country. The Mountain Valley Pipeline had been held up for years and years and years. It was a pipeline that was supposed to cost $3 billion. At completion, it ended up costing $9 billion because it got held up by a federal permitting process and then activist litigants in state and federal courts. There is a historical example, however, of that happening before. The same thing happened in the late 1970s. In the state of Alaska. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline was being held up for environmental reasons. And it took an act of Congress to get that pipeline built. In the intervening time, that federal permitting process has just gotten worse and worse and worse. And if it weren't for Senator Joe Manchin, in the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, there still wouldn't be that Mountain Valley Pipeline, which ships natural gas from the state of Pennsylvania through West Virginia to output into the Gulf Coast. That pipeline still wouldn't be built if it weren't for that act of Congress. It shouldn't be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. That pipeline right now is fully subscribed. We need another pipeline because the natural gas resources in this state are growing so much. But we're tapped out right now because there's no takeaway capacity left for the state of Pennsylvania. So this is becoming a jobs issue, it's becoming an economic issue, it's becoming a consumer issue. And I believe that ultimately it is about to become a political imperative because energy prices are going up. We're in this fascinating place right now where gasoline prices have been going down, but energy prices are going up 10, 20%, and they're only going to go up more if we can't build pipelines and transmission lines in this country again. And by the way, this isn't just something that the oil and gas industry needs. We know that other sources of energy need it too. And if we're going to power the future that we know that we need in this country and win the energy revolution, permitting reform is required. Andrew mentioned that we're currently in this terrible government shutdown. The political parties are at the farthest point away that they have almost ever been. But this is one area where I think our country can actually come together and get something done because it is a political imperative. Because in that, what we call the energy trilemma of how do you provide energy that is affordable, reliable, and sustainable, it's affordability that almost always wins. And when American consumers stand up and see that their energy prices are going up 20% and their politicians aren't doing anything about it, they will vote and they will make this a political imperative to get this done. API recently launched a campaign. We call it the America Builds, America Wins campaign to provide the political space for lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to come together. And there are glimmers of hope. The United States Congress right now is working on a bill called the SPEED Act that is a bipartisan bill between Republicans and Democrats to fix this process. But that's not the only thing that has to be done. You talk to API member companies, our big companies that want to build these big energy projects. And what they tell me is that, yeah, the federal permitting process and the state permitting process takes too long. But we can get through it. What has to be solved is the endless litigation that occurs and the venue shopping that occurs. So even after you get a federal permit, it's almost impossible to get anything built in a timely and economic fashion. We can't wait. And it is time for Republicans and Democrats to come together to get this done. The energy revolution started right here in beautiful Titusville, Pennsylvania. And what you see here, the historic sites, of course, you can still smell the oil in the Drake well. It's still coming up, by the way. And I would encourage you to walk 100 feet away and see that incredible site. That energy revolution started right here. But it doesn't have to end here. The United States can continue to be the largest oil, gas, and by the way, renewable energy producer in the world and win the race for the future because everything starts with energy. And we know that if America builds, America wins. With that, proud to be here in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Hello? Oh. Does anyone have any questions? Sid, why am I not surprised?
First of all, thank you very much. I agree wholeheartedly with you and my support. It seems there's a bit of a conundrum now, if you will, in the sense that we would like to see a low price for gasoline and diesel and natural gas for electricity and home heating, cooking. So consumers want a low price, but the industry needs a price adequate to give them margins to support development and to keep finding 100 million barrels a day of new oil year after year. and to do research and to pay for environmental things that we all want to see kept alive. So how does one handle that conundrum? And certainly the president's faced with that right now, and I'm sure you're faced with that too. So what do you say about this conundrum on price?
Absolutely, and great question. This is what I'll say, first of all. This is an industry that, as you can tell from the museum behind me, we're very used to the booms and busts of the commodity cycle. Prices go up, prices go down. Our member companies at API, we invest over the long term to ensure that the American people have an appropriate price for what they pay every single day at the pump or for their energy. And I'll say that I went through a pretty historic bust during the COVID pandemic when oil prices actually went negative for a short while at negative $39 a barrel. We all should have bought then, by the way. So that was a period, of course, a historic period, and as the museum gets updated, I'm sure that will be highlighted as well. But that was a period where the industry was not very well capitalized. And there had been a lot of capital that flowed into. We were not returning money to investors as the industry should have. And the industry, just like nobody else was prepared for a global pandemic, the industry wasn't prepared for a global pandemic. Now this industry is very well capitalized and is ready for what looks like another downturn in prices, mainly as a consequence of OPEC producing more barrels and putting them in the market. So the industry is resilient. The industry will continue to produce. What's amazing is we are now producing more oil in this country, more natural gas in this country than any country has in the history of humanity. But the real question is, are we going to be able to continue to explore and find new resources? Because if you listen to the scholars on this, the Permian Basin, which is the #1 producer in the United States right now, this is the area in Texas and New Mexico. If you listen to the scholars, they think that production is peaking or will peak in the Permian Basin sometime in the late 2020s. For what it's worth, I don't believe that. But that's what many of the scholars suggest. But if that is true, we need to be looking for other places to find these resources in the United States. So that's why increased leasing in the Gulf of America is very important, which President Trump has put back online. So there's a boom in the amount of exploration in the Gulf of America right now, and we expect that there are going to be 30 lease sales just in the next 10 years to produce more oil and natural gas from the Gulf of America. You're seeing people return to Alaska. That Trans-Alaska pipeline that I mentioned earlier is not operating at full capacity. We could be developing more in the state of Alaska and in many, many other places. But we have to be able to have access to these resources. So Gulf of America, more lease sales on federal lands, returning to Alaska, more development in the Gulf of America. That is what's going to provide the resources that we're going to require if we're going to continue to be the world energy superpower.
Great. Brenda.
Hi, good morning. Brenda Schaefer from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. So several times during your presentation, you mentioned the phrase energy transition. But actually, there's zero evidence that we're replacing fossil fuels with today's generation of renewable energy. And in fact, if you look at the latest report of the Energy Institute, one of the most reliable sources of energy data, they estimate today that fossil fuels supply 87% of global energy consumption, meaning from their estimate in 2023 was 81.6, so meaning an incredible increase due to their more sort of reliable assessments about the role of fossil fuels. Is there any reason we should continue sort of, in a sense, misleading our public about this idea that we're on the eve of a transition to today's generation of renewable energies, and also misleading investors about these trends?
Brenda, I completely agree. I think actually we are transitioning from the energy transition. Let's put this into perspective. That the last time a so-called energy transition occurred was the 1960s, when we started using more oil and gas than we did coal. So we were transitioning from coal to oil and natural gas about in the 1960s time period. In 2024, the world consumed more coal than it has in the history of humanity. In 2025, that number will be exceeded. We'll use more coal in the history of humanity than we have in all time. So energy transitions are very rarely energy transitions. What happens is the pie gets bigger. More people are consuming more energy. But we are going to need more energy to provide to the world. And that means we're going to have a lot more oil and natural gas, of course. You know, we expect that by 2040, we're going to require more than 110 million barrels of oil every single day. We're going to need a heck of a lot more natural gas because that's how most people are powering their homes right now. But in addition, we are going to need new energy sources as well. Although, I would argue that, wind and solar are some of the oldest, kinds of energy. The first, solar cell was actually invented in the 1890s. Wind, of course, has been around for decades and decades. We had an energy transition, and it was from those sources of energy to oil and gas. But we're going to need a lot more energy on the grid, where that pie is only growing. And so, yeah, we're going to need oil, we're going to need natural gas, we're going to continue to need a lot of coal, but we're going to need wind and solar and geothermal, which we have out right in front of us. But also, we're going to need a lot more nuclear. And so advanced nuclear technology is going to be very important for our future as well.
Tatiana?
Thank you. I'm Tatiana Anderson. I've worked with Andrew in the Drake Forum for a few years now. Thank you for your comments. You talked about this issue being a bipartisan one. We have some pretty heavy hitters in this room from the world of research and development, think tanks, politicians themselves. What would you say to all of us in this room about what we can do personally to address the bipartisan issue, to bring people together, to really, I guess, do everything you're saying about creating an energy revolution that's actually moving forward?
So this is a great question. I do think that politicians, lawmakers, I spent 20 years in government service, they are moved when their constituents tell them to move, and not until then. We have a state senator, we have a representative here as well who represent this area, Lee and Scott. So pleased that they're here with us today. They can speak to this, that when their constituents call, when their constituents write, they move. And I'm telling you, we're at this cusp, that as prices continue to rise because of more demand on the grid, this is going to be a political imperative for lawmakers. It's not going to be enough to say that we don't want to do that because it's fossil fuels, or we don't want to do that because it's wind and solar on the other side. We have to get back to a point where, I'll remind you that the fracking revolution occurred when Barack Obama was president of the United States. That this was at one point a bipartisan issue, more energy on the grid, and that's one of the ads that we're playing in Washington, D.C. right now, traces the history from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan to George Bush to Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton in between, to now, where every politician talked about energy security and energy independence. This has historically been a bipartisan issue. So I'm hopeful that as it's everyone in this audience that has it in their power to do this, call your congressman, get involved. Go to API's website that is called permittingreformnow.org and join this revolution where we're actually going to be able to convince people that this is a political imperative to get it done. Because it doesn't just mean the country's economic future, but it means consumers' ability to continue to pay for these resources.
Hi, Michael Ratner with Congressional Research Service. My question kind of gets at what you're talking about, but from a little different perspective, in that how do you, or what are the effects on your job, API's job, but everything that you've been saying, when the pendulum of politics swings so widely from currently to Trump, if you're going backwards to Biden, to Trump, to Obama, how do companies, how does API reconcile those big swings in politics?
Michael, that's a great question, and let me do a call out for the Congressional Research Service. I mentioned I worked on Capitol Hill for decades, and the Congressional Research Service is such a resource for Congress in providing nonpartisan information. It's a national treasure. So, Michael, thank you for what you do. Darren Woods, right after the election, Darren is the CEO of ExxonMobil, made the point that this industry does not invest over 4-year cycles. We invest over the long term. So part of my job at API is to pendulum-proof the American oil and gas industry, no matter who the President of the United States is. So we work with both political parties. I had the opportunity to meet, almost on an annual basis with John Podesta, who spoke to this forum just last year. John Podesta was a voice of reason within the Biden administration. We have great working relationships, across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats who care about these issues. And the most important word in the American Petroleum Institute is institute. We are meant to be a research body, a provider of data to lawmakers and to others who seek to learn more about this incredible, energy industry. So it is a challenge because you're right. The pendulum does seem to be swinging wider and wider, and my challenge as the CEO of API is to not get hit by that pendulum every 4 years. I will say that the extreme swing from Biden to Trump has been something to behold. I mean, if you think about what we were going through with President Biden, where they were canceling lease sales in the Gulf of America, they were holding up leases on federal lands. They put in place the LNG pause for exporting liquefied natural gas. I don't think, because I think even Democratic politicians now confirm that they swung way too far towards that so-called energy transition. And now you even see people like the governor of California, Governor Newsom, who just signed into law a bill that will allow for more leases in Kern County, California, which is one of the most prolific oil fields in the world, that we're going to have more drilling in the state of California because he recognizes that they've gone too far. So I think what you're probably seeing right now is that swing in the opposite direction, where President Trump is canceling wind projects and solar projects all over the country. I actually think now that we've seen these two extremes, that there is room in the middle for us to develop this bipartisan approach to energy because of energy demand going up and prices going up, and everyone recognizes that we have to get back to an all-of-the-above energy policy.
I have a follow-up. Thank you so much. I wanted to speak a little bit about kind of the regulatory certainty piece in the middle of those pendulum swings. I hear what you're saying about projects moving forward, and then I understand kind of on a long-term basis, right? Like that's super important to have that clarity, right? So you can, as you're saying, build that infrastructure ahead of time, ahead of when you need it. But I wonder if you can kind of speak to. I hear a lot from operators and industry about how difficult it is to make decisions in the interim, like on the regulatory side, with all the uncertainty around, as you say, the pendulum swing, what we're seeing from the administration on rollbacks and akin to the kind of cancellations that you're talking about of projects that, we need more energy, right? We need more transmission. So I guess in that space, like, do you see room for preserving the kind of consensus-based regulatory changes over the last 10, 15 years that have, in large part, I think, been adopted? I work on methane, and for that, many operators are investing billions of dollars to capture methane, bring it to market, and seeing environmental improvement. So I guess, do you have any comments on, like, at this moment in time, like, what your view about regulatory certainty is?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Elizabeth, you raise a great point, which is what has been truly historic about the last few decades is that energy production in the United States has gone up, but emissions have gone down. That's never happened before. And it is because of innovation and industry focus on cutting those emissions and environmental performance. API, for example, has a program called the Environmental Partnership, which is all about how you reduce methane emissions within our own operations. Not because of a government mandate, but because we recognize that there's a problem in methane emissions and we have to address that problem. Regulatory certainty is a huge issue for us. I'll give you an example. So the Environmental Protection Agency just announced that they were going to get rid of the greenhouse gas reporting program, the so-called GHGRP. The Environmental Protection Agency does not currently have statutory authority to execute a GHGRP. And what they have done is they've drawn a firm line in the sand that EPA now, under the Trump administration, is saying that if we don't have statutory authority to do something, we're not going to do it. So my industry, the American oil and gas industry, wants to continue to report on emissions. We've been doing this for 15 years. We want to continue to be able to do it. But it looks like the GHGRP is going to go away. So right now, we're in a process of figuring out how are we going to replace our ability to report on emissions. So API is going to play a key role in that. We're already downloading all of that historical data, that is publicly available data, so that we can continue to report and compare it to historical data as well. We want to be able to continue to report and show the progress of the American oil and gas industry in reducing emissions over time. We also support the full federal regulation of methane. And at this point, anyway, in our negotiations with EPA, they plan to continue that program. We've suggested some tweaks on how they do it to allow for us to use more modern technology to report these methane emissions, but we want to continue to have that regulatory framework so that we're not dealing with 50 different states regulating methane emissions. So regulatory certainty is very important. And I'll tell you that if given a choice between a more stringent regulation that we have to deal with and giving us regulatory certainty over a 10-year, 20-year time horizon, we would take that more stringent regulatory system. And that is what we have advocated for. We want to continue to report. We know how important emissions reduction is for our social license to operate, but also for environmental performance. So no matter the administration, we're going to continue this work of the Environmental Partnership to reduce emissions within our own operations, not just at the wellhead, but in the transportation and also the refining of these important hydrocarbons. So we will do it if the federal government isn't going to do it, because it is that important for our license to operate going forward.
So we are behind schedule as usual here at the Drake Forum. Mike, your words were, I think, really captured the moment, particularly the need for bipartisan approach to the energy problems in front of us and the environment and so on. I've written hundreds of emails to people to get them to come up here in the woods and to be with us. And in the end, it's interesting the connections that actually get people up here. It wasn't an email to Mike that got him up here. Actually, my good friend, a classmate here from Oil City, Kayvon McNoon, and his family are friends with Mike and his family. And
our daughters were sorority sisters.
Yes, and Kayvon was my fraternity brother. And that's how small the world really is. And it's those personal connections that are very, very important, right? And I would say that to all the young people out here, that there are a couple of things that are very important in life. One is your personality, and the other one is the personality of your boss. And I think you know a little bit about that, Mike. So to make this appropriately personal, I have something for you to go back to Washington with that you're not going to be able to fit in your carry-on, but we'll get it back to you.
Oh, that's awesome.
So earlier this year, a local collector approached me about this. I was able to get this on the open market It's fully listed down below here, so nobody can ever forget it, whoever sees it. But this is a banner from the 1934 opening of Drake Well Museum here, which was shepherded by API. It was professionally framed by Victorian City Art and Frame in Franklin. And it reads that it's this banner that API spearheaded that effort to commemorate the birth of the modern energy industry in Pennsylvania on August 27th, 1859, presented with great appreciation to API President and CEO Mike Sommers, October 2025. I'm so glad you started out this talk about how happy you are to be up here, how impressive the museum is. We don't want this to be your last visit. We'd love to have you up anytime you want to come up. But we're hoping that you can accept this small appreciation of our history to hang on your walls in Washington, D.C.
I can assure you this is going to have a prominent place in the API Washington office, so thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So cool.
We'll make sure we get it to you.
FedEx can transport.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Mike said maybe we could get FedEx to take it. Actually, it's going to be my car, but that's okay. You know, it burns gasoline for now. You know, who knows what's going to happen? Yeah, Andrew X, exactly.